guys, Olive here. Today I would like to tell you about the top 5 nonfiction books that I read during the calendar year of 2016. You all know how I love nonfiction, and while last year I kind of lumped in my top nonfiction picks to my top 10 books of the year, I thought it was only fair to break it up into nonfiction and fiction sections. Since the nonfiction reading experience gives us something so much different than the reading experience of reading a fiction book, it felt kind of wrong last year to include the nonfiction interspersed throughout the fiction reads. My next video will contain my top 10 fiction reads of 2016, but for now, let's just talk about the awesome nonfiction I read during the year. I will give you the usual disclaimer that these books were not necessarily published during 2016, but simply the books that I read during 2016. Coming in at number 5 is The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business by Charles Duhigg. This was a read off of my Young Professional TBR, and I absolutely adored the reading experience of this book. This book talks all about habits, where they reside in the brain, how our brain goes about forming them, the things that need to be in place to create a new habit, the things you need to do to break an old and potentially bad habit, how powerful habits are in our daily lifestyles, and what advertisers do to exploit that. This book has changed the way I view my daily life. I now identify triggers for certain habits that I have, and it's certainly going on my 2017 resolutions list to get rid of some of those. I also found the brain science of how habits are formed absolutely captivating. There were a lot of really interesting case studies in this book about specific patients that were studied who had brain injury in some way and still were able to create new habits. These were patients with extreme forms of amnesia still creating new habits in their day-to-day lives. For a nonfiction book, it has a ton of reviews and ratings on Goodreads with good reason. It was fabulous and I recommend it to everyone. Pick number 4 is Ages for Hawk by Helen Macdonald. This is a memoir of Helen Macdonald's experience right after her father's very sudden and unexpected death. She had always been a falconer or someone who trains birds, but she decided after the loss of her father that she needed something to fill the void. She decided that in order to try to help her move on from her father's death, to give her something to focus on, she would train a goshawk, one of the most difficult birds to train. So the book does center very heavily around her training of this goshawk and how it moves her along in the grief process in a really non-typical and really emotional way. But the book also talks very heavily about T.H. White, the author T.H. White, who penned a similar memoir of his attempts to train a goshawk. Helen Macdonald sympathizes with him very strongly because he didn't really know what he was doing, and he was also training a goshawk to fill many voids in his own life. At first, I didn't really know how to take the parts where she was examining T.H. White's experience, but I grew to love it as the book went on. The book is written in a very scattered and very deep emotional manner, which really conveys to you where Helen's mindset was during her grief process. I have not read a lot of grief memoirs, but the intersection of kind of the literary study, her own experience going through the grief process, as well as her love of the natural world, her love of animals, the combination of those three made a beautiful, highly emotional read that I still think about all the time. Number 3 on this list is Moonwalking with Einstein: The Art and Science of Remembering Everything by Joshua Foer. This was another pick off of my Young Professional TBR and one that I absolutely blew through. Joshua Foer is a young journalist who happened to stumble across an assignment to cover the United States Memory Championship one year. He became so interested and so caught up in the methods that these memory champions were using to memorize huge amounts of material that he decided he wanted to take up the art himself. This book is an amalgamation of several different things. It's Joshua Foer's attempts to train to enter the next U.S. Memory Championships. It's his efforts to explain what is called the art of memory, the technique that these memory champions use. And really, it's just a closer look at what memory is. It shows where in the brain memories are stored, how our brains evolved to remember things best, what kind of memory works best for the art of memory. Being someone who is absolutely fascinated with brain science and with memory in general, I was ravenous to pick this up. I loved every moment of the listening experience to this audiobook. I loved hearing about Foer's efforts to train and how sometimes it made him feel crazy. I loved hearing about the science aspect. I loved hearing his interactions with the fellow memory champions. It is one of those nonfiction reads that just makes me want to shout from the rooftops. Great nonfiction can be equally as entertaining as fiction. Up next in slot number 2 is Unmentionable, A Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners by Therese O'Neill. I just recently finished this one, and it is already one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time. It is probably the funniest book I have ever read, and I've read some funny ones. I know a lot of people, specifically people here on BookTube, have a lot of romantic feelings for the Victorian era, whether it be from watching period dramas or reading books set in this era or written in this era. There are a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings about the Victorian era. This book will bring you back to reality a little bit. This is about how Victorian women really lived, the challenges they faced in things like hygiene, social manners and etiquette, dressing, being potentially diagnosed with hysteria. This book is not gloomy in any way, and it certainly does not try to make fun of anyone who harbors a deep love for this era. It simply illuminates the facts of what life was really like for women living during this time period. What this book does brilliantly is inject wit and humor into its presentation of what life was like during this time in order to highlight the absurdities of the era. There are images interspersed throughout this book with hysterically funny captions. The whole thing is told as though you are a 21st century woman traveling back in time to the era you love so much, and what a culture shock that would be for you if you did so. I had this out on ebook from the library and had to go and buy my own copy. And let me tell you, the number of times that I embarrassed myself on public transportation while reading the ebook on my phone are countless. I am sure people on public transportation thought I was insane, maybe should be diagnosed with hysteria myself, because of the amount of times I was cackling and grinning at my phone while reading this book. If this is an era you're interested in, or if you want to read more historical feminist works, or if you just want a good laugh, definitely pick this one up. And finally, number 1 on this list, or my top nonfiction read of the year, should come as no surprise to anyone who's been watching my channel for a while. It is The Soul of an Octopus, a surprising exploration into the wonder of consciousness by Cy Montgomery. This is a book not only on the science of the octopus, what we know so far about them in terms of their biology, their mental capacities, their emotions, their state of consciousness, but it is also in many ways a memoir of the time that Cy Montgomery spends going to different aquariums, bonding with different octopuses, diving to meet wild octopuses. It's about her bonds with the other people who were visiting the aquariums at the same time. And at the heart of it, it does talk about what it means to be a conscious living being, what it means to have a connection with other people and with other living things. It is impossible to explain how emotionally resonant this book was with me. This is the first nonfiction book that has ever brought me to tears, and not in a I'm so sad kind of way, but in a way that I was profoundly touched. Her reflections on what it means to be a conscious living being and how deeply satisfying it is to connect with other living conscious beings are some thoughts that will stick with me for the rest of my life. I expected kind of a fun, quirky book about the science of the octopus and what makes them tick, and what I got was something much deeper, 100% beautiful, and something I've been recommending to everyone. So those were my top 5 nonfiction books of the year. I had a great year in nonfiction. It was really hard to narrow it down to just these 5. I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you in the next video where I talk about my top fiction picks of 2016. Thanks for watching. Bye.